Okay, great. Thank you everybody for joining today's National Voter Registration Day event for TACL. And as mentioned on the event, that we have two special guests today. One is Eileen and the other one's Helen. And I'm gonna start with introducing Eileen. So Eileen is the Director of Strategic Partnership at VoteAmerica. She focuses on creating strategic alliances with corporations, nonprofits, and influencers to advance voter turnout. Eileen's nonprofit career has been guided by her belief in fighting for social justice, equity, and human rights. Born and raised in Kaohsiung, Taiwan, Eileen is a proud Taiwan TACL political intern alum and has been active with the Taiwanese American communities for more than 2 decades. She currently lives in Washington, D.C. with her family. Thank you, Eileen, for joining us. So
thanks for having me.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with asking you some question about about VoteAmerica. So how has it been for you working as Director of Strategic Partnership for VoteAmerica.com?
It's been quite interesting. We are currently in campaign mode, so we're literally working around the clock, 6-7 days a week. So it's been quite crazy, to be honest. But it's also been quite meaningful working in an organization that's really with a mission to provide people with trusted election information, open source technology, and robust education programs to help increase voter turnout. And with my role, working with partners really is to find ways to fit civic engagement and voter participation work as part of companies' corporate responsibility, and kind of allows us to reach their consumers and employees that way. And as many of you may know, our nation has one of the lowest voter turnout rate compared to other democratic countries because of many reasons. But a lot of times they're done with the purpose of suppressing voters. For example, there are things that other countries do to help increase turnout include like automatic registration enrollment once they turn the legal age, or hosting the election day on a weekend, which is something that Taiwan does as well, just to make it easier to vote. But we don't have that luxury here in the US. And so VoteAmerica is designed to help close some of these gaps, to help enhance equitable access to voting. So we built this very user-friendly technology to help register people, to help them request mail-in ballots for voting by mail. There are a lot of outdated rules required by some of the states. For example, to print out your forms and you sign it and then mail it in or fax it. And who owns fax machines or printers these days, right? And so in order to solve those hurdles, we created these voter engagement tools, basically to help you, close these hurdles. For example, one thing we do is it kind of turns your smartphone into a fax machine using computer vision to capture your wet signature and then send it in for voters for free. So those are the type of things that can be solved by technology, and we are kind of in it to kind of think in a very creative way on how we solve these problems through technology. And our theory of change is that voters really don't need people to convince them to vote. They just need to be able to vote. So VoteAmerica really aims to provide, the equitable access that's required for everyone to be able to vote.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. You actually covered my second question as well about describing a bit about how the platform was built. But can you speak a little bit more to that too? So you mentioned how, I think when we spoke previously, you mentioned how long it took and the funding behind it, and how this is a platform that actually, thank you very much for allowing us to have access to this. So we built the TACL vote on our website, so guiding people to register, etc. So can you speak of just the scope of, just wanted to give a framing of how heavy lifting of this kind of aggregator website, how that, the work behind that.
Yeah, so our platform has a suite of 6 tools, and one, register to vote. The other is verify or double check your registration status, request mail-in ballots, a locator for your nearest collection ballot boxes, as well as your polling places and others. And so it's a suite of tools that you can literally find everything you need on our platform. And we work with partners like TACL to embed this white label product, which allows you to kind of design your page according to your brand, that allows it to fit seamlessly with your brand. And everyone that you capture through the website, then it'll funnel through our system, and we then take these the data and then run our Get Out the Vote program. Our Get Out the program is consisted of multi-million dollars that we fundraise, and really the point is really get voters from being registered to actually cast the ballot in the very end. And so our studies show that it requires about 7 touches from getting a voter registered to actually vote. So these 7 touches is something that we aim to do by working with partners. So we send important election reminders like, don't forget, this is your deadline for your state to apply for mail-in ballot, for example, or this is the types of ID that's required to present at your polling place. So these important reminders hopefully will make it easier and remind people on exact time and help them make a plan to vote. And working with partners like Credit Karma and other companies that we work with, we want these brands to send out messages to remind people as well. Again, the end goal is to get them to cast that ballot in the very end. And so we send text messages, we place ads, SEO searches, you name it. We also spend a lot of focus on campus as well, because young people are one of the low propensity voters that we target. Without going into too much detail, but 2016 had 1 or 2 schools had more students to turn out to vote, it would have swung the election results. So we focus very much on turning out people of color who are traditionally targeted for voter suppression, and then young people who just also has a lot of hurdles that prevent them from voting, and also others who are our low propensity voters. So that's kind of a gist of what we do. We also run research to help inform us on some of the more effective ways to engage voters.
Great, thank you so much. And next up is Helen Lee. She is actually dialing from Nepal, so I keep wanting to mention how early it is over there. So thank you very much for joining us today. So Helen Lee is the founder of the Fresh Off the Vote, a podcast by a team of young Asian American Pacific Islander Zillennials who want to make voting, politics, civic engagement more exciting. This past August, she also served as an at-large Bernie Sanders delegate to the virtual Democratic National Convention, representing American voters living abroad. Growing up in Richmond, Virginia, and attending university in St. Louis, Missouri, Helen's passion for civic engagement and racial equity has been shaped by her experience in these 2 cities, as well as her Asian American identity. Again, thank you, Helen, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm going to hear rooster sounds probably randomly as I talk. So
yeah, that's great. And very few of us can claim that with rooster in the background. Okay. So my first introductory question for you is, can you speak a bit more about what made you want to create Fresh Off the Vote podcast and what the journey has been like going into your first episode? Because you dropped your first episode this year as well, right?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to create Fresh Off the Vote because, yeah, you just heard the rooster. Because of lack of, I feel like, content out there that focuses more in depth on how electoral politics or just politics in general and civic engagement relate to Asian Americans. I know there's a ton of podcasts and everything, and there's actually still a ton of content, but it was also centered around California, certain areas. And I really drew my inspiration from one of my role models, Hassan Minhaj from the Patriot Act. Unfortunately, his Netflix show got canceled. What I really loved about him was that he focused in depth on these issues with like 20, 25-minute episodes, but also carried the community like with him, you know, like he was one of the first major talk show hosts to focus on voter turnout specifically, or focused in depth on topics such as like why cruise ships don't work, or just like why you should care about affirmative action, all these topics. And drawing inspiration from him, I wanted to go more in depth within this November 2020 election and getting out the vote through just getting young people to listen more, to think about these issues. And so we launched our podcast. Well, I had this idea. I was alone. And also with the pandemic, I decided, I got some encouragement from other mentors, and they were just like, yes, post in the Facebook abyss and find people to jump with your idea. And so I did, into 2 Facebook groups, Asian Creative Network and Asian Hustle Network. Recommend to everyone to join. And young people just DM'd me. And we formed our first group chat June 25th. And we launched our first podcast episodes August 3rd. And it was, something I'd never done because we were all remote. We've never met each other in person. But at the same time, there was something magical about all of us not really knowing in a way what we were doing, but we just knew there was an issue at hand, which is that APIs are the fastest growing population in the United States, but politics doesn't really think about them. We don't really talk about politics, and it's important to delve more deeper and educate ourselves on different issues and how they matter to us and how they matter to the larger majority of America. And so our podcast is focused on issues, college voting, you said, Eileen, is yes, one of our first 2 episodes was focused on college voter suppression and how hard it is to vote on a college campus. And then we've done issues such as rise of third-party politics in Hawaii, very niche, but also very fascinating why that occurs. And then we recently did an episode on evangelical churches and the Black Lives Matter movement. And we just wrapped up an episode this week that focuses on, young people and slacktivism or slideshow activism you see on social media. Does it actually do anything? And how can you actually make a difference? And we really love the fact that we're creating dialogue around these key issues. And more importantly, we ourselves as a team of 12 young people have found the sense of community during a pandemic. And we've learned so much throughout the process.
That's amazing. Yeah, I try to think of myself when I was in college. Well, I did join Peace Corps, but it was never an idea of me trying to create national dialogue. So I am personally very impressed of what you've been trying to do with your friends. So leading into the next hour of conversation about how to get people to vote, just want to ask this question for both of you, that in terms of VoteAmerica.com and Fresh Off the Vote, what do you see is your biggest role? I mean, for with your various roles in terms of in the 2020 election. Who wants to start? Eileen, I'm gonna be.
No, Helen, you go first.
Okay.
Dang, Eileen. What? Yeah, so I think we talk about the 2020 election, and I want to bring up this point that it's beyond 2020. When I initially founded the podcast, the goal was like, let's get out the vote. We need to get out the vote amongst, Gen Z millennial APIs. We need to do that. But throughout creating the podcast, and as we pitch our episodes, as we draft them, as we get feedback from people, as we put it out there in the world for people to listen, we realized that, yes, we can play a role in the sense that, we did an episode on Proposition 16 in California, or we're doing, we did an episode on Kamala Harris and her identity. And, does representation politics matter? So those are very key issues to November 2020. But I think we've learned throughout creating this podcast that November 3rd is going to come and go, and these issues are still going to be present. And civic engagement as a process is a journey, and it's ongoing. And so while we're trying to get our listeners to tune into, issues like immigration, climate change, all of these things that will matter at the polls, the key thing is, wow, look at all of these young Asian American leaders. Look at all of these people who are trying to make a difference in their own sorts of ways. And so civic engagement doesn't need to be just you going to the ballot box and dropping something off. It's a very thorough process, and you don't need to have all the tools to get started. We did not, we didn't know each other. We had no idea what we were doing. But truly, I think our role in this election is to start educating ourselves, empowering ourselves to educate others, and then also taking this torch of that civic engagement is going to be beyond just November 3rd. We need to hold our elected officials accountable always, not just we send our ballot off and then we feel at ease, right? That's step one. And it can feel exhausting, but that's another thing is civic engagement feels exhausting, but we found ourselves a community where we can support one another. And I think that prevents you from burnout, helps you adapt and ask those key questions.
I think for me, I can look at it in two additional ways that makes VoteAmerica a little unique. So working with corporations in the civic engagement space is relatively new for me. I mean, being in the corporate responsibilities, area for more than a decade now, I've done a lot of social issues, a lot of environmental issues, but not necessarily in the civic engagement piece per se. And so for me to go out and pitch the work and trying to help companies really understand why civic engagement should be part of their corporate responsibilities work. I've gotten kind of different responses from conservative companies who are like, oh no, we don't touch, politics. Even though civic participation, and the right to vote is human rights. It's not about politics. And what we're doing here is nonpartisan. And so we are not telling people to vote a certain way. We're here to just ensure that people get out to vote so that we have a really representative democracy that is representing the voices of the people. And so a lot of the angle of lifting your community's voice, giving people a voice, those are the sort of angle that we are trying to approach these large corporations. And then you have companies who are just super liberal and be like, yes, let's do it, or I have companies who just reach out to me and just be like, I want to work with you and make a difference, in this election. People are seeing this election being very more important than the ones in the past for various reasons that I won't name, but so that's it's really driving people to want to do something. So it was really good to see that. And another thing that really makes Vote America stand out is our our ability to see the importance to reach out to people of color. Again, we're seeing a lot of polling places being closed down in Black and brown communities. People are waiting in line for hours and hours and hours. It's a form of voter suppression. So how do we maximize our reach so that we could ensure that these people who are traditionally targeted for voter suppression can have a chance to have a voice and cast their ballot? And so understanding that the importance of getting these people out to vote is just as important as other sort of higher propensity voters, like white voters and others. And so I think that's the unique role that we play in trying to get, making sure we do outreach to places of worship, HBCUs, on top, as part of our college outreach program, and things like that.
Great, thank you. So we kind of ran over time a bit in the first section, but you guys got into the meat of what this discussion is going to be anyway. So I want to go over, so we're just going to go over the history of voting in America very quickly, so we can jump into the challenges for 2020. I think that's where we want to get to anyways. The reason that I had carved out this section for the history is also to remind people that in America, the right to vote wasn't always there for everybody. So I took that, when I was wanting to go back to history, thinking about voting in America, you have to think about really the condition after Civil War, right? So then you have the 15th Amendment giving the right to vote. And then 19th Amendment giving the right to vote to women. So one by race, one by gender. And then you still have to have another law in 1965 to make sure there's no voter suppression. But there's also various other ways. So this is quite interesting that there is a long history of what it means to be counted as a citizen, as a full human being, and having that right to vote. I just wanted to mention that before we go into the challenge of today, because I think everything is sort of on a continuum too. So there's a history of not really, even if you're born in America, for me as an immigrant, then somebody has said to me, someone who was born here, a white male too, he said that maybe you should vote. He doesn't vote. He said maybe you should vote because it's your newfound right, which is interesting in some way. But I think that even when you're born in America, you have to think about there are different ways of classifying people all throughout history of America. This union of ever more perfect union is a progression. It wasn't, the promise of it is a continuum too. So anyways, I just want to quickly cover that part. Do you guys want to mention anything about that?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. It sounds like history, but there are tons of voter suppression tactics that we're seeing today, or even just in 2013, after President Obama really turned out a lot of Black and brown minority voters and Asian voters in general. In 2013, they, instead of reauthorize the Voting Rights Act, the Supreme Court decided to, in the Shelby's case, that they're gonna allow voter ID law. Again, it's a form of voter suppression. Just thinking about, there are certain individuals who just don't have the ability to travel miles and miles to go to a DMV to get a driver's license, or they don't even own a car, right? And having that's not that far from here, right? It was 2013, And so just seeing that and seeing more and more states that are implementing these voter ID laws and preventing a lot of people of color from voting, it's really not that far away of history. It's right around the corner, you know. And then with COVID, you know, things are just getting worse. And so, you know, what we're hoping for this year is that the turnout rate doesn't slump, you know, as low as the midterm election or even lower. And so, yeah, it's kind of crazy just thinking through. In the past, you know, literacy test, or you have to pay a poll tax in order to vote, or voter intimidation, you know, like, you know, if you're black back then, black person back then, and you're trying to vote, you might get killed or you might get threatened with your life, you know. And again, 2018 Georgia governor's race, closing down polling places during the time that's not COVID. There are all these tactics that we're seeing all the time, and we're seeing in front of our eyes that are still happening today. And it's for me, it's just like, it's so obvious, and why are we still letting it happen? It's, you know, but it's still happening, and the politicians are doing that on purpose to prevent voters from casting their ballot.
I just want to add to that about, you know, being Asian American Pacific Islander. Another issue related to, in some ways, voter suppression. It relates to voter access too, and language is a huge thing. And in some states, you know, I think it's Michigan where they have Bengali language ballots. Don't look this up, but it depends on a certain percentage of the population demographically meeting a threshold, and then you have to advocate for that to happen. And so in many states, you know, you might have these naturalized voters who may not, you know, understand the most English from their ballots, and they also have the right to vote. But there is this voter intimidation tactic being like, oh, you don't understand the language, and we don't have ballots in your language, and we don't have any campaign materials in your language. And therefore, people who are American citizens who have the right to vote, sometimes they're saying, well, nobody's ever reached out to me. No one's ever told me that I could vote. And these are issues that directly affect communities of color. And it's really, really important for us to raise awareness of that. And, you know, I think, Christina, you said, you know, it's the right to vote has been expanded, and it's still being debated. You know, I think in Florida, and this is controversial, but related to ex-convicted felons, and how do those who have a certain criminal record, are they able to vote, even though they will still pay taxes, even though they will still be affected by the decisions that are made directly in their local offices. And so the right to vote is still constantly expanding. And in a way that it is such a privilege for us who can vote to use our voice to advocate on behalf of others.
To add to what Helen just said about the returning citizens in Florida, the tricky part, and this is obviously a voter suppression, is that when you call the court or the county to find out how much fine you have left to pay off so that you can vote, right? They usually give you the wrong number. I know someone who thought, you know, first someone told her that she owed $500 of fine, and she didn't have money to pay off, so she couldn't vote. But then the following election, she called again, and they say it was just $4. So they're giving all these misinformation as a way to prevent people from voting, and that's you know, being done at local election office, local level, state level, you name it.
Wow. Yeah. So I guess I'm you know, it's like in your mind you think like, oh, maybe you're better off today, but the history is still always unfolding in some way that yeah, it's quite interesting. So jumping forward to so continuous this topic, but moving to 2020, looking at the exact challenges that we're facing for this election in November. So when we were talking before about identifying the key challenges, we mentioned 5. We already talked quite a bit about voter suppression. Do you want to specifically talking about what people should be watching out for 2020? Who wants to start? I was wondering, Helen, being a student recently, I think you mentioned recently, right? Okay, it's like, sometimes I'm getting old, so sometimes I'm like, did I have that conversation? I think I had that conversation. But so can you describe a little bit more about what was it like in terms of for college students or younger people? Maybe I think that kind of falls under voter suppression too, if voting was so hard, because we're working with the premise that people, the right to vote should be, if it's a right, then as a citizen you ought to be able to do it, not because you pay the fine or whatever, that it's a right. That's the definition of a right, that you can do this, right? So Helen.
Yeah, I think talking about college students, it also falls under the umbrella like where I am right now, which is just mobile voters, those who are not going to be like in their neighborhoods traditionally where their polling places are. So I'm a broad voter right now, but I'll talk first about college voters. We actually did this in our first podcast episode. We interviewed 2 directors of civic engagement, one at University of Chicago, one at Washington University in St. Louis, my alma mater. And we talked about how college voters, they're in this space where they just moved to some of them moved to a new residence, which means they have the choice of either voting in their new residence, their new locality, or back home via absentee. And that means, and in America, every single state is different. So you have to like educate yourself on the new rules of your new home, the new politics, right? Which isn't bad, but there are also all these hurdles, such as like in Missouri, for instance, like you need a notary, which is the fancy way of saying you need someone to validate that you are the one like signing this document. And I'm assuming that at the age of 18, most people don't know what a notary is potentially, or they don't know a person who can do that. And you know, with the pandemic, that's even weirder because a lot of them registered for this state and then they were all sent home to go back to their home state. And there's this question of like, okay, do I like vote absentee now? Do I vote in person? What does that look like? That is also tied in with like whether colleges like reopen normally or not. And then another issue is related to like IDs and some states, I believe Georgia's always been complicated, requiring like for absentee applications, there's a lot of different requirements that a lot of times students, because they can't be in person or they don't know the right people, the process gets really complicated and then they miss deadlines and then they don't get to register to vote. And that's really sad because we've had this population of voters for like so long, yet it's still so difficult for students to, you know, I remember registering voters back in 2016 and there was also not just like voter suppression in the sense that like these processes were difficult, but there's a lack of like PR about it. You know, a lot of students were like, oh yeah, I got my driver's license. And I was like, okay. I was like, yeah, I think I'm registered. I'm like, no. In some states you are. That's another thing is policies are not uniform. Sometimes when you get your driver's license, there's an option to register. Most of the time there's not. And so you had to go state by state and really tell voters, you need to look up, you need to check your registration. Don't just assume that these things are happening. And so that's one thing I would say that for college voters, it's really challenging because they're just getting to know what voting is. And the resources often are not as PR'd as they can be. And there's also complications because they're from all over, all these different states. And that's a big information overload for both the educator and the person who wants to vote. And then the second population I want to talk more about is abroad voters. because there are 6.5 million Americans that live abroad, and maybe some of you all are also, living abroad. And what's very challenging about voting from abroad is there is a threshold to participate in democracy financially. Because for around 20 something states, as of this election, so COVID-19, imagine like beforehand, you have to mail your ballot back. You cannot electronically return. So you can cash a check. And if you're a military service person, in some ways you have the leeway to electronic return, but most ordinary citizens abroad can't just, take a picture and send it back. They have to mail it. And some people are, located in the like remote villages, I don't know, Argentina or somewhere, or their local postal services are not already efficient. Now add on COVID-19, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges is we know that the USPS in the United States is not the fastest getting the results back. Now imagine that for overseas voters. And that's even more challenging because there's double layers with COVID-19. So I got my ballot on September 19th. September 19th was the day for overseas voters to get theirs if they registered early for the postcard absentee ballot. And I have to drop it off recommended to the embassy here by October 2nd. So I'm gonna fill that out really fast and give it to the embassy, but also like follow up with the embassy. Like, are you mailing it? Is it gonna get there? Make sure everything's postmarked correctly.
Oh man. Sounds quite a lot of steps to follow through. So yeah, and well, thank you very much. So actually, you touched, so I'm just gonna name all 5 challenges we named before. So voter suppression for this year is still ongoing. Coping with the COVID, so you mentioned a bit about that before, and the USPS issues, well, it's also more intensified this year as well. And early voting rules, just voting rules in general, and then we also mentioned the voting abroad, so how that also has its own complicated rules as well. And also looking at sort of the 50 states, different and local rules as well. So switching over to Eileen. So of all these challenges, like which one do you want to touch upon the most? Really see how Vote America, where in terms of you guys' research and where you're dedicating most of your, I mean, when Helen's mentioning PR, so I feel like a lot of what you guys work at Vote America is making it look fun and easy, accessible information for voting registration, for example. Take it away.
Yeah, I think I'll touch on the impact of COVID as well as USPS challenges. Because of COVID, we are expecting a shortage of poll workers, which will result in, closure or a longer wait at polling places. Many of these poll workers are older, over 65, and they kind of fall under that high risk group. So many of them decide not to work. And so that's why one of the ways to address that problem is voting by mail. And that's sort of the thing that we've been pushing for this year. Because we know many Americans will unlikely or unable to vote in person due to the fear of COVID-19. And our research tell us that voting by mail can help increase voter turnout, especially with low propensity voters. And there are about 5 states that were already all vote by mail state before COVID. There was Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, Utah, and others. And we are seeing more and more states that are jumping on board, like Virginia, where Helen, Christina, and I myself are from. Starting June, they had changed the rule to allow people to vote by mail without any excuse. So COVID can be an excuse, basically. Before that, you would need to declare some sort of disability or any specific reasons for that. In Texas, for example, you cannot vote by mail unless you're 65 or plus or have permanent disability. So, you know, Texas is one of the states that is not really, again, talking about Texas, the lowest voter turnout state in the country. I can go on and on. But so really, I understand that there are a lot of skepticism, especially when it comes to USPS, all these news that you're seeing right now. Should I trust that my ballot will be delivered on time? Many people have that question. But there are new measures that states are taking to make sure that your ballot can be counted. First is ballot collection boxes. So a lot of states are actually putting out drop-off boxes. And so these are all run by the states. So it's the officials that are, picking it up, counting it, and it doesn't go through USPS. And so VoteAmerica actually has a locator that will help you locate these collection boxes as well as your polling places. And if you decide to choose USPS, make sure that you turn it in early to get counted. And the second thing is that I think so far 39 states are offering online tracking system for your ballot. So you can actually go online and see to check if your ballot got counted or not. So these are some of the ways that election officials are putting together to help ease that anxiety of like voting by mail and the reliability of USPS. And so I just wanted to let everyone know that you can, especially like in California, I know where a lot of TACL folks are at, you will be mailed with a ballot automatically this election, and you just need to find your nearest collection box, or if you decide to mail through USPS, just drop it off early or vote early. Otherwise, if you decide to vote in person on November 3rd, it's guaranteed going to be a long line, so do prepare for that.
Great. So let me just repeat the challenges that we have mentioned that for 2020. Number one is voter suppression in general of maybe having no access to your polling station or having challenges by ID rules, maybe being not clear. And two is coping with the COVID situation that you might need to prepare yourself more in terms of thinking ahead how you're going to vote. And three is the U.S. postal challenges, and then also so those specific rules in terms of how you can mail in your ballot. So, and as Eileen mentioned, to vote early. And then four is we wrote down here early voting rules. So take a look if you have early voting available in your state. So that might be one of the options. But the hurdle is also, again, that there's different rules sometimes within the states as well. So look up the rules. And fifth one is if you're abroad, then you have to also look ahead, like Helen mentioned, how there are different rules for if you're not attached to the military or you're individual American private citizen being abroad. There's also different rules apply, and they can complicate things in terms of voting. We have tools, so we'll include these links that they're on VoteAmerica.com, that they are specific, more writings, more literatures on vote by mail rules, early voting calendars, and overseas voter information as well. So we'll post this after this talk on the event website as well, so people can explore this further. But do you guys think we cover everything? Have you thought of anything else that about 2020 people should keep an eye on? Anything else?
Can I just add just one more thing? And I think that answers Andrew and Eric's question. I think voting by mail, again, it's an option. And if you don't want to deal with the fear of COVID-19 or the fear of just waiting in line, I really encourage all of you to vote by mail. And a couple things to keep in mind is, one, you must sign on the outside of your envelope. Make sure you follow the instruction. A lot of, about, I think 50,000 ballots were discarded during the primaries because people forgot to sign the outside of the envelope, as well as the signatures don't match the signatures on your driver's license. Again, these are all very outdated rules. We can submit our tax forms online these days, but with voting, they're still requiring us to get a DMV, ID as well as signing. So make sure if you get your license when you're 16 and that you are a lot older now, make sure the signature matches. Otherwise, it might get thrown out. So just these two things to keep in mind.
I also wanted to add that, you make an accountability system, find some buddies and be like, hey, have you registered to vote yet? Or, ask your aunties, uncles, your parents, people who it might be weird to engage in political discussions, but asking them whether they've registered to vote is a simple question. And, maybe they have, maybe they haven't. And you can be that person who assists them within this process. I strongly think like family units in voting should be talked about more.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so talking about reading all your instructions, I'm one of the guilty people that when I get like a new electronic, I never read through all the instructions, but I definitely am trying to remind everybody that when you're voting, read through all the instructions. So make an exception. I am making an exception now when I vote. I read through all the instructions, making sure that my vote, when I put through the effort of getting that vote or getting to the polling station, making sure my vote counts. Okay, so moving on to the next section. So we talked about the challenges that we're facing in 2020. We also wanted then go through some example so we also built a website based off of the tools from VoteAmerica.com. But first we want to do a polling, right? Wellington, do you know? So yeah, so we want to, can everybody vote on what you're thinking in terms of where you want to go? Yeah, we just want to go quickly. So while we're taking this poll, it's just interesting to start thinking about how everybody's thinking about how they're going to vote this time. And also depending on your location too. But in the background that we'll take 30 more seconds to see if any more people are gonna give us some feedback. I plan to vote. Oh, nobody want to vote in person? So it's interesting. So 0% voting in person. I know only this is like a pretty accurate, like only half the people that are on here voted. And I think that nationally we track about this is like 60, 50 maybe, right? So it looks like overwhelmingly people are going to vote by mail, and then a few that have the early voting option is going to take that option. So that's pretty interesting. Okay.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. So do I just close it, right? Okay. So we want to show you guys this is our TACL.org website and /vote that you can see this available too. So our slogan and logo this time is called, thank you, Wellington, for scrolling back, Tackle the Vote. It's created by Jessica Yoon, also someone from Fresh Off the Vote. And she designed this logo for us. So it's sort of a play on word, tackle the vote, TACL the vote. Anyways, I thought was pretty funny. Anyways, scrolling down a little bit. So right underneath is just you see the table of contents, and that's basically how we really want everybody to think about as you start to think about your plan, right? So really starts with register to vote, and then, or if you register, double checking. Thank you. Valentine's my Vanna White today. Request your absentee ballot if you're looking to mail. So this one will be where you guys would go to for the majority of people on this call. And then election reminders. We can also sign you up and remind you about the election. And then for people, apparently no one on this call is going to the polling place in person. So, but for people maybe wanting to go to the poll, where's my polling place? And then if you want to track information or talk to your local electoral office, then we also have that link as well. So
Christina, can I add two very quick points?
Sure.
So if you have registered or voted in the past, it's still good to double check your voter registration status. Many times local election offices purge voter list on purpose for good intentions, like, taking out people who have moved away from the state, or, those who have passed. But a lot of times they are done again with the purpose to suppress voters. So some people show up at the polling place surprised that their voter registration for some reason didn't happen, and so make sure it just takes 10 seconds to double check your voter registration status. If there's one thing you can do today, this is the thing to do. And another point I want to flag is where is my polling place? This tool we will be adding a locator for collection boxes. So where you can drop off your ballot will be part of this tool, and it'll be updated by the end of the month once we get all the state's information. And so stay tuned. For those of you who are voting by mail, this will also be the place to go to locate your nearest ballot collection boxes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Eileen, for a reminder for that. And all this beautiful graphic format that you see today is built by Eric Chan from TAP Seattle. So thank you very much, Eric, for helping with this. TACL is both based on volunteer work, so I'm always very thankful for all the efforts that are behind the scene to make it happen. So we really want to present so it's not obvious already. I really want to present this tool as a way to go to concretely, practically what everybody can do to ensure your own voting rights. So we're gonna go through. So can we go back to the if we wanted to show demonstration of information for different states, for like Texas and Georgia, could we go to the early voting, or there are sections on the VoteAmerica.com, right? That we can share that information, right, Eileen?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So those are by states, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So this is, thanks, Wellington. So we're going to click on. Can you walk us through a little bit on this, Eileen? Do you mind?
Yeah, so voting by mail again. The tricky part about mail-in ballots is that it's processed not at the state level. So voter registration is processed at the state level. So you have 50 forms plus DC 51 forms. However, with mail-in ballot, it's processed at a local election office level, which there are about 10,000 of them, and they sometimes can have different rules. It's really crazy. But we have a team who is, constantly updating the new regulations regarding this. And so if you come to our page, you'll be able to get the most updated information. So let's say there are certain states like California, Colorado, DC, you will automatically get a ballot you don't have to request it. But then you also have the second section where it says mailing ballot application to all registered voters. And then you have, this next section, anyone can vote by mail, but nothing is mailed automatically. And so these are the ones with criteria, basically. And it's not mailed to you automatically. And you actually have to request it, basically. So that's kind of what these two categories is about. And then the last one is that you just cannot, unless you are 65 plus or have permanent disability, that, pre-existing information doesn't count, apparently. Like today I saw, was it Mississippi? I think it was Mississippi, yeah, that, even with pre-existing condition, it doesn't qualify for being able to vote by ballot. So if you just go directly to the tools and enter your information, our system will be able to guide you and let you know exactly what your state requires you to do, whether it's nothing or you have to, someone will mail you a ballot ballot application, and you can decide whether you want to do it or not, or you have to actually request it, or you just can't do anything about it.
So this page covers all 50 states, right? So it's quite interesting.
50 plus DC. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And yeah, it's quite interesting. And on our Instagram, we've been posting the month to deadline. So starting early October, then really, so people have to pay attention. Now we're heading into early October. So for many states, your registration deadline is coming. But we want to click into, so just want to, we couldn't really quite, we didn't want to share personal, because realize that you have to put in your address, your date of birth. So that's quite a lot to share online. So I've opted for this option of just going into looking at the data set. So if we click into Texas, would that be? So yeah, so if you're voting by mail, here are the rules. So it's quite interesting. So you have to be 65 years or older. So I'm wondering if we have anybody from Texas here today on the phone then. It'll be out of the county election during the period early voting by me. Hi, Kevin. You guys gonna have to vote in person then. So that's pretty much, because well, but if your parents, I guess this is focusing on the COVID piece, that the idea is that the older people are more at risk. So they think if you're younger than 65, then you should just go in person.
No, this is Texas saying, I don't give a crap about COVID-19. And so we're not loosening up rules.
I mean, don't they have like I have friends who said, so I have a friend, she was also an abroad voter. She's in France, and her residence is in Texas. And she just got her American citizenship, super excited, and her parents just did too. But what they realized was they're not 65 or older. And I don't know if medical conditions are under their vote by mail rules, or you have to show proof of it very strictly. Yes. And so compromise people, it's like really hard for them to make their case.
Exactly.
I think I would agree, Eileen. This is a very tough set of rules during a pandemic.
Yes, Texas is notorious for voter suppression. And I'm also hearing that Texas is closing down more than 500 polling places, again, mostly in Black and Brown communities. And so we are going to be expecting like long lines. And so, just be aware of that. Our folks over there, is it Kevin and and Justin.
Yeah, so we have people from Texas responding to what we're saying here, that as it turns out, you can declare medical condition and they can't ask you what your condition is. Okay.
You can lie about it and no one's really gonna check, but it's a felony if they find out, FYI.
Oh, Okay.
Yes,
Okay,
the
so
class 1
if
felony.
you have a medical condition, truthfully, then please do that, but don't lie about it. Yeah, that's probably a good rule. Oh, and they have curbside voting. Do you know much about that, Eileen? What would that be?
Yes. In Harris County, they are doing, kind of like COVID drive-through testing. They have drive-through voting at parking garages, and so kind of interesting. We'll see how that goes. But it's very
Instead
creative.
of long line, it'll be long lines of
Long
cars.
lines of cars, and people are not getting off. You will be handed over a little kind of iPad type of thing, and then you get to vote from the little machines while staying in your car.
So we can move on to the other example we want to go through is Georgia. And so also, I think it's, yeah, we're particularly interested in this section of, so any registered Georgia voter may request an absentee ballot and vote by mail. Counties are now allowed to use absentee ballot. Also, they have drop boxes. Each county will decide if they will use drop boxes. Georgia voters can request a mail-in ballot online as of August 2020. Oh, that's early. Well, maybe not earlier actually, but
That's super late.
late. Okay. Sorry.
Well, I mean, for abroad voters, requesting these, like, our deadlines are much earlier. So to hear that they just made it legal as of August, it's like,
it's really
close.
just states rolling in and decide to change their laws very last minute. Yeah, this year. There's still lawsuits going on. Things might still change in the next couple weeks, and so we'll just have to continue to monitor.
I love what Wellington said. He said, we could request or mail in fax. And I would just like to say, fax machines are very not affordable.
Right. But our tools can fax it in for you for free. And so that's why it's good to go through tacl.org/vote. Through our tool, we'll be able to fax it in for you for free.
Awesome. Okay. So we've covered we mentioned registrations go onto our website and then talking about mailing rules. I think it'll be interesting. Is there we have the link to the early voting, right? Would be interesting to see how that's, early voting. And if anybody on this call can just let us know if we just picked Texas and Georgia because we thought they're the most interesting examples to go through. But if you're in the state, excluding California, because you guys are gonna get a ballot, just make sure you mail it in. So that's what we didn't say California, even though it's heavily Asian American there, a lot of Taiwanese. 4 out of 10 of our TAP chapters are in California, but we chose not to use it as an example.
And also, like, just because you're automatically mailed a ballot doesn't guarantee the voter turnout to be as higher. So like Prop 13, well, it's more of a local ballot, but we saw that it didn't really increase the voter turnout for that particular proposition. And so anyways, it's important to return your ballot. And that's what so we're trying to raise that awareness even in states like California, who will be getting ballots without requesting.
Okay, great. So now we're moving, I think we covered the examples. Oh, no, Texas early voting. I read those rules. We'll go to Texas. So we're gonna include these links to the event website, the Facebook event page, so you can also check out this information specifically for your state as well. But if you're personally looking for information, you can just use the tool on TACL/vote, so you can register and find out your personal information. Yeah. So in general, that these two different states is asking for IDs. Yeah. Do you guys consider IDs as a voter suppression tool, or is it, because I think that's an interesting question.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
For young people and people with disability, with, you know, for people of color. Like, for example, college student, like New Hampshire, for example, has this weird rule that you have to have New Hampshire driver's license in order to vote in the state. And a lot of out-of-state students don't have the in-state ID. So that created a huge problem, a big suppression on students' ability to vote. And with, again, people living in Black and brown communities where DMV is not nearby, and it's, you know, it's like 30 miles away, they don't have a car, they have to spend money to, you know, take hours of bus or even just hire a car to get there. It's just, and when you are, you know, you just don't have time. It's definitely a form of voter suppression that a lot of us who are privileged, you know, in a way that we have a car, we can get anywhere we want, we don't see it as a problem. But for a lot of people who are working 2-3 jobs, you know, a single mom, they just don't have the capacity to even think about just getting ID. And the problem is, some people have like student ID, some people have like their like health insurance ID and other like veterans ID, military ID. Those won't work, and that's the problem. And you know, even if there's a date of birth and things like that, none of these work, and you have to have a DMV or like a federal, you know, like a passport, some sort issued ID in order to vote.
Yeah, and those IDs usually cost money too. And I was gonna mention how Helen mentioned that you need a notary in Missouri. Notary also costs money too. They're not free, as far as I know. Yeah, so it's interesting. So if you have to pay, I guess the idea is that if you have to pay, you have a certain hurdle to get to that right, then it's in effect erasing that as a right to that person, the citizen itself. So, okay. So I see, while we wrap up this segment of looking at examples and looking at the tools for TACL.org/vote tools, if anybody want to ask any question in person, we can switch you on and welcome any questions that can be phrased in person right now. Let me know. I know I got a question from Andrew Yip before, but I don't know. Are you on the call? Guess. Oh, great. Andrew, do you want to ask your question in person?
I already asked my question, so my question has been answered. So you can. Yep. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess I actually really liked your question. So so I think, so I know Eileen answered that, but I don't know if Helen like also covered. So his question was actually that if you had to choose between mail-in or in-person voting in this time, like what would you recommend? I think Eileen, you mentioned you would push for mail-in, right? And if Helen, if you weren't abroad, like what would you recommend for younger people? Because I have other ideas around that too.
Yeah, so I mean, my situation's unique, but kind of twofold. I would say, you know, I'm not sure. I heard from some of my mentors that in Georgia, you know, it's when you go in person to vote, there's also voter intimidation tactics, right? Like saying like, oh, you don't speak English well. And then like you herd them all over to one side. And then, you know, people had to wait to get questions answered and then they didn't get to vote or things such as that. So I recommend mail-in voting just because it's you avoid the potential in-person tactics that are unpredictable on November 3rd. If you want to vote in person, try to there's early, like go in and vote, early voting. But yeah, I would recommend mail because it's the safest right now for a lot of people who may be immunocompromised, who live with immunocompromised people. option. You're frozen on my, okay, there we go, you're back. So I highly recommend mail-in voting, but I know it's like really hard to like put your thing in an envelope and then hand it off to the abyss in some ways. That's where the election tracker comes in. I remember I tracked my ballot in the 2016 and 2018 elections online. So if you're just uncomfortable with like handing it off and not being able to see it go towards, you know, polling places, track your ballot.
Great. Yeah, so we have these conversations. I think this is the type of conversation we want people to be having among family members and friends, just to get people thinking about how they're going to vote too. And we were I was speaking that if, for instance, like someone like me who's youngish and don't have pre-existing conditions or that you think that it's easy enough for you to get to the poll, then maybe in that condition, right? So to save the mailing for the older people or for other people, I wonder if that's something that is being brought up, or we're just generally saying everybody should just mail in. Okay, but we can move on to other topics that are around. So when we mentioned there's so many, so yeah, and also, yeah, we're gonna say definitely. So I guess there was another question that I want to ask, but yeah, I just saw Helen's note on how we should all register. So for someone like me, if you don't live with somebody with high risk for COVID, then, and young people, maybe for college people too, if they're still on campus, or I don't know, for younger people to go and think about being registered as a poll worker at this time as well. Can become poll worker. Yeah.
Sorry, like one of my mentors said in our podcast episode, you can go to a frat party and you seem to be fine with not social distancing there. You can do that in the evening, before that, like during the day. And, you know, because a lot of poll workers are often very elderly people who are at risk.
Yeah, so yeah, the premise is that most of the poll workers, the profile for them generally are retired people, because this kind of job is short term and not very well paid. So it doesn't attract younger people. So usually for people who are already retired, have like, because you would be working the whole day. There is a whole segment on Brian Lair that covered it, and New York is doing a lot of effort. That's where I am right now. Doing a lot of effort on recruiting poll workers as well. So one other thing that I thought was being pretty much in the news as well, that looking at with all these mail-in ballot and the rules around how it's being counted, because there's a lot of states don't let the registrars start counting them beforehand, right? So then it would take a longer time to be counted. Do you have any comments around that around what that scenario will look like? And that would be a brand new experience, right, for Americans.
Yeah, we are doing quite a few different scenario planning with our team right now. And don't be surprised that this is the year where we cannot find out who our president is on the day of election day or the night of the election day. Again, unless there's a candidate with a significant lead, otherwise it could take additional days to weeks to actually get the final count. And so there's a lot of anxieties and also sort of skepticism around this. And so totally understandable, but definitely this is going to be an unprecedented year because we're living in an unprecedented time with COVID-19. Christina, you're muted.
Sorry, we're way over. That's what I was saying. And we're going to wrap up this conversation now. We're going to wrap up by naming a couple of the takeaways that we want to remind everybody to do. So there are 5 of them, right? Actually, I added one more, so there's 6 of them. So the first 3 is really to go to tacl.org/vote to make sure you've double checked your registration status now, request your absentee ballot now, develop a personal plan for voting now. So this all can be accomplished when you go to tacl.org/vote. And then also echoing what Helen had mentioned earlier, that that within your close friends and family to also encourage them to vote. And the 5th one is to look out for translated materials for people that cannot read English or English is not as accessible to them, to help them be informed so they can vote as well. And the last one is to also consider to be a poll worker on the election day. So those are the 6 takeaways, and we'll list those on the event invite as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's been a very informative discussion. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.